Plunging from 10,000 meters without a parachute, a man risks it all for a $3 billion prize. Millions watch the live broadcast in breathless anticipation, but the stunt ends in a horrific fatal impact. Yet, instead of fading into oblivion, he awakens on his knees in a shadowy, nightmarish realm. Sobbing in terror, Ethan begs for mercy, screaming that he hasn't done anything to deserve this damnation. Without a word, a mysterious woman steps forward, shoots him directly in the forehead, and hurls his body from an airborne plane. Even with a bullet hole in his skull, Ethan flashes back to where his nightmare truly began 7 years earlier. He was a promising young graduate sprinting to a high-stakes job interview at a prestigious conglomerate. Suddenly, a panicked pedestrian dashed into the chaotic traffic and was violently struck by a car. Ethan rushed to help, only for the stranger to take his final, agonizing breaths while gripping Ethan's arm. The graphic tragedy left Ethan completely traumatized. Sitting in the interview room moments later, his mind was a shattered mess. Unable to articulate a single coherent answer, he lost the opportunity of a lifetime. With his corporate dreams crushed, Ethan graduated into a mountain of student debt. To survive, he spent nearly a decade scraping by on grueling part-time gigs as a delivery driver and waiter. His family offered no financial safety net. His father had passed away, and his devoted mother exhausted herself working as a building janitor just to afford his education. Despite sending out hundreds of resumes over 7 agonizing years, full-time employment remained entirely out of reach. Hope finally flickered again when Ethan secured a follow-up interview at the same elite firm. The executive, a sharp man named Thomas, openly praised his background, leaving Ethan ecstatic. But the joy was painfully short-lived. Leaving the building, Ethan received a frantic call from a close friend revealing that a mutual associate had vanished into thin air, taking every single dollar of their joint investments with him. Driven by pure panic, Ethan raced to the associate's apartment and pounded furiously on the door. Met with total silence, desperation turned to blind rage. He grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher, smashing the door repeatedly until he collapsed to the floor in a weeping, broken heap. Instead of recovering his stolen life savings, Ethan found himself detained at a local precinct for property damage. He begged the officers to hunt down his crooked business partner, but the police coldly explained that a failed business investment isn't a criminal offense. Disgraced and entirely broke, Ethan met up with his long-term girlfriend, Chloe, later that evening. He watched in silence as she stepped out of a luxury vehicle, accepting a bouquet of flowers from another man. When Ethan approached her, the immediate scent of alcohol on his breath sparked tension. Chloe gently noted his recent lack of employment and handed him an envelope of cash. Feeling insulted by what he perceived as pity, Ethan realized he had become an unbearable anchor dragging her down. Believing their future was dead, he abruptly ended their relationship. Returning to his apartment, the universe dealt its final blow. His landlord had evicted him, seizing his security deposit to cover months of unpaid rent. All of Ethan's earthly possessions were dumped onto the sidewalk under a pouring rain. He spent the agonizing night desperately trying to shield his belongings from the downpour, but by morning, most of his life was ruined. Huddled on the wet pavement, a notification buzzed on his phone. A cold, automated rejection from his job interview. Completely shattered and pushed past his breaking point, Ethan gave up. Ignoring a final, desperate phone call from his mother, he threw himself off a high-rise building in the center of the city. A brief void of pure darkness followed before Ethan suddenly opened his eyes inside the cabin of a luxury private jet. Catching his reflection in the window, he gasped in horror. His face belonged to an entirely different man. Sitting across from him was the enigmatic woman from the void, holding his suicide note. With a flick of her wrist, she incinerated the paper as her sunglasses slipped down, revealing terrifying, glowing crimson eyes. Instantly, the luxury cabin dissolved, and Ethan was pulled into a horrific dimension. Beneath a colossal, crumbling tower, a crimson sea churned with screeching demons trying to claw their way to the top. The entity introduced herself as Death. Furious that he had treated his own existence so cheaply, she explained that his suicide was a direct mockery of her power. Grabbing him by the throat, she hurled him over the abyss into the swarming mass of monsters below. Before the creatures could tear him apart, Ethan jolted awake back in the private jet, wearing the stranger's face once more. Death reappeared, announcing his true penance. Ethan would be forced to experience the agony of dying 12 more times. His consciousness would inhabit the bodies of 12 distinct individuals trapped on the brink of unavoidable fatalities. If he failed, he would face eternal damnation. However, Death offered a single loophole. If he could use his wit to alter fate and survive even one of these impending tragedies, he would be permitted to live out that person's life. If you're enjoying this recap so far, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more movie recaps like this. Initially, Ethan welcomed the idea of oblivion, but as Death vanished, the jet slammed into a catastrophic storm. Animal survival instincts overrode his despair. He frantically buckled his seatbelt and threw on a life vest while a terrified flight attendant tried to assure him it was mere turbulence. The aircraft briefly leveled out, giving Ethan a moment to process his surroundings. He realized he was now inhabiting the body of an incredibly wealthy elite. Suddenly, a brilliant, glowing shard of energy pierced his mind, flooding his consciousness with the host's memories. This body belonged to the ultra-wealthy, lifelong heir to the very conglomerate that had rejected Ethan. He learned that he and his ruthless older brother, Thomas, had spent their entire lives locked in a bitter blood sport for their tyrannical father's approval. Through relentless corporate scheming, this younger brother had finally secured the throne as the new chief executive. Ethan felt a surge of triumph, realizing he had inherited an empire and intending to fight for this luxurious new reality. But reality shattered as a jet engine exploded violently outside the window. The aircraft went into a terminal nosedive. Ethan dodged flying furniture to strap himself in, but the hull ripped open, instantly sucking the pilot and crew into the sky. Helplessly pinned to his seat, Ethan could only scream as a wall of fire consumed the cabin, burning him alive. Ethan woke up back in the underworld, which had shifted into a bleak, desolate wasteland featuring a sinister glowing doorway and a desk where Death sat counting down his remaining lives on a macabre clock. Loading fresh rounds into her pistol, Death explained that the original souls of these hosts were already gone. Ethan wasn't robbing anyone of life, but rather giving their doomed vessels a final chance at survival. If he failed all 12 trials, an eternity in the deepest pits of hell awaited him. To prove her point, she dragged him to the glowing door, forcing him to witness unspeakable, mind-shattering torments. Terrified and broken by the vision, Ethan wept, demanding to know what crime warranted such agonizing punishment. Death coldly replied that his crime was choosing to seek her out before his designated time. However, she reiterated that if he managed to save any of the remaining bodies, his soul would be redeemed. Determined to fight for survival, Ethan steeled his resolve, and Death fired a bullet directly into his mind to initiate the next cycle. Ethan opened his eyes in freefall, screaming in midair as he plummeted from the clouds in a professional wingsuit, without a parachute. 3 skydivers with cameras recording his descent flanked him. Another diver surged forward to grab his hands, and a second glowing shard of memories flooded Ethan's brain. He was now inside the body of a legendary, adrenaline-addicted daredevil who held multiple world records for surviving near-impossible stunts. Today's televised spectacle involved a blind dive from extreme altitudes, aiming to land perfectly on a specialized safety net below. If he pulled it off, a shadowy billionaire sponsor, remembered vividly in a memory playing with a lighter, would award him a $3 billion cash prize. The allure of unimaginable wealth lit a fire inside Ethan. Shaking off his helper, he streamlined his body, rocketing toward the earth at terminal velocity. Though the original host's soul was gone, the muscle memory and elite aerial reflexes remained perfectly intact. Filled with supreme confidence, Ethan neared the target area, but a sudden calculation error sent him wide of the mark. He missed the safety net entirely, slamming into the earth at devastating speed. Back in the grim chamber, Ethan raged at Death, arguing that his suicide was a victimless act that harmed no one else. Death called him a blind fool, telling him his self-absorption kept him from seeing the collateral damage he left behind. Before he could argue, another bullet sent him into his third trial. He woke up slumped over a wooden desk in a high school classroom. Nearby, a student laughed loudly while watching a viral video of the skydiver's gruesome death, confirming to Ethan that all these lives existed within the exact same timeline. Before Ethan could react, the glowing memory shard integrated into his mind. This body belonged to a vulnerable teenager raised by a struggling single mother who worked day and night to provide for him. The boy loved his mother deeply but hid a dark secret to protect her. He was the target of merciless, brutal bullying by a sadistic classmate named Justin and his gang, who routinely beaten him, stole his money, and humiliated him on camera. Unable to bear the high school hellscape any longer, the boy had resolved to end his own life. Ethan realized that surviving this specific loop simply meant choosing to stay alive. Suddenly, Justin walked up, slapping Ethan on the back of the head and demanding his usual tribute. Refusing to play the victim, Ethan snapped. He grabbed a heavy wooden chair and leveled Justin to the floor. When one of Justin's thugs lunged, Ethan countered efficiently, pinning Justin against a glass window and demanding an apology. The retaliation was cut short when a powerhouse student named Marcus blindsided Ethan, tackling him to the floor and delivering a brutal beating. Justin's gang pinned Ethan down so Justin could land a series of vengeful punches, while the rest of the class watched in paralyzed silence. The violence ceased only when a teacher entered the room, but the moment the final bell rang, Justin's gang cornered Ethan again, delivering a relentless beating so severe that even Marcus eventually told Justin to back off. Justin only stopped when the girl he was trying to impress walked past the corridor. Later that evening, Ethan walked into the boy's modest home. Seeing the loving notes and home-cooked meals left behind by the boy's mother triggered painful memories of his own mother's sacrifices. He remembered how she used to work late nights as a janitor, and how he would secretly join her shifts to lighten her exhausting load. When the boy's mother arrived home, she noticed an immediate, mature shift in her son's demeanor, and Ethan had to fight back tears of profound regret. The next morning, Ethan confronted Marcus in the restroom, questioning why a fighter of his caliber took orders from a coward like Justin. Marcus revealed that Justin was backed by a dangerous senior gang leader who ruled the school. Crossing Justin meant bringing down an entire criminal brotherhood. Later at lunch, Justin tried to humiliate Ethan once again. Anticipating the move, Ethan grabbed a boiling bowl of soup and dumped it directly over Justin's head. As Ethan walked away, a humiliated Justin ordered Marcus to attack, but Marcus calmly refused, telling Justin to go clean himself up while the cafeteria erupted in laughter. A brief flashback revealed Ethan had approached Marcus earlier, laying out a calculated psychological trap. Desperate to reclaim his status, a humiliated Justin ran to his senior gang enforcers for backup. The older gang marched into the classroom ready for war, but when the ruthless leader realized Justin wanted an entire criminal outfit to beat up a lone, scrawny kid, he grew disgusted. Calling Justin an pathetic coward who couldn't handle his own battles, the leader disowned him from the crew and warned him never to approach them again. As the gang departed, Ethan openly mocked Justin's sudden downfall. When Justin lunged forward in a blind rage, Marcus stepped in, leveling Justin with a single punch. Stripped of his protection and status, Justin fled the classroom in total disgrace, only to see the girl he liked walking away with the senior gang leader. That evening, a triumphant Ethan went out for a run, feeling confident he had mastered the rules of survival. He narrowly avoided being crushed by a speeding transport truck, stepping back just as the driver slammed on the brakes. Exhaling a sigh of relief, Ethan stood frozen on the pavement. He never heard Justin creeping up through the shadows behind him, a heavy concrete brick raised high. Before Ethan could turn around, the weapon shattered against his skull, sending him crashing into the asphalt as Justin began a frantic, fatal assault. Reappearing in the dark underworld, Ethan lets out a furious roar at death. In response, she violently slams him against the wall, pins his face beneath her heel, and fires another bullet into his skull. When he opens his eyes for his fourth life, Ethan is tied to a chair, gasping as a bucket of icy water is thrown in his face. A group of ruthless operatives surround him, demanding to know where he hid a massive stash of stolen cash and a missing woman. When Ethan hesitates, a thug positions a knife right over his eye. As the interrogators grow impatient and brandish a heavy mallet, the glowing memory shard finally pierces his consciousness. Ethan learns this body belonged to an elite, international fixer specializing in brutal corporate problem-solving. The fixer had fallen in love with his psychopathic crime boss's girlfriend. Seeking to free her, he stole 10 billion won from the syndicate and hid it away, but his own crew ambushed him on his way to their rendezvous. Realizing he possesses the lethal muscle memory of a master martial artist, Ethan moves. He shatters his wooden chair against his captors, using the fragments as weapons. Smashing the main light switch, he plunges the chamber into darkness and executes a flawless, silent ambush, neutralizing every mercenary in the room. Standing among the wreckage, Ethan realizes that with these capabilities, he can survive. All he needs to do is recover the stolen billions and vanish. He retrieves his phone, hijacks a motorcycle, and tears into the night, only to discover the interrogation cell was actually the back of a moving transport truck. As Ethan speeds away, his syndicate boss activates the GPS tracker on the fixer's phone, broadcasting his live coordinates to every contract killer in the city for a massive bounty. Within minutes, an armada of vehicles corners Ethan on a massive suspension bridge. Gunfire erupts, but Ethan weaves through the bullets. Missed mercenary rounds cause spectacular multi-car pile-ups, triggering a massive fireball. Ethan accelerates, launching his motorcycle directly over the exploding wreckage. Hunted by a fresh wave of hitmen, Ethan drives his motorcycle straight through the glass doors of a luxury shopping mall, tearing up the escalators to the roof. Reaching the helipad, Ethan drives off the roof in a spectacular leap, plunging into a crowded penthouse pool below. The water completely destroys his phone, instantly severing the tracking signal. Drenched but free, Ethan arrives at the designated coastal pier to meet the fixer's lover. She runs into his arms, but as Ethan whispers the secret location of the fortune, a deafening gunshot echoes. The woman steps back, a smoking gun in her hand, revealing the entire romance was an elaborate setup to steal the billions. Ethan opens his eyes in the underworld once more, met by death's mocking laughter. But Ethan merely smiles back. He had intentionally given the treacherous woman a false location. The 10 billion won remains securely hidden. Death cuts his satisfaction short with another bullet, sending him into his fifth life inside a juvenile detention facility. Waking up inside a cramped, concrete holding cell, Ethan struggles not to panic. Entering his permanent cell, his cellmates inform him he only has 4 days left before release. They also warn him to stay away from the corner, pointing out a shelf lined with chilling artwork and textbooks on criminal psychology belonging to a supposed psychopathic murderer. When the infamous inmate is escorted back, Ethan is stunned to recognize Justin, the sadistic high school bully from his third life. Fueled by residual trauma, Ethan lunges forward, raining punches down on Justin until inmates pull him away. The memory shard finally settles. This time, he is inside the body of a prodigy MMA fighter. His impoverished family had fallen into deep debt, forcing him to take the fall for a corporate executive's fatal hit-and-run accident in exchange for 200 million won. Tragically, the victim succumbed to her injuries, and the teenager was sentenced to 2 years for manslaughter. The memories also revealed Justin's secret. The bully had merely memorized psychological profiles to counterfeit the persona of a hardened psycho so inmates wouldn't target him. Ethan bursts into hysterical laughter, realizing Justin is only locked up because he successfully murdered the high school boy from Ethan's previous loop. Ethan begins brutally slapping Justin across the face, exposing his fraudulent tough guy act to the entire cell. Too terrified of the fighter's strength to fight back, Justin cowers, becoming the target of universal prison harassment. The peace is shattered during a vocational carpentry class. A corrupt inmate intentionally triggers a high-speed mechanical saw blade, launching it directly at Ethan's head. Ethan dodges with microsecond reflexes, and the remaining prisoners seize heavy tools, coldly informing Ethan that the corporate lawyer has placed a bounty on his head. Utilizing rapid, devastating combinations, Ethan embraces the flawless instincts of the MMA fighter, dismantling the armed mob with wooden planks and workshop tools. When a cowardly inmate named Tyler returns wielding a crowbar to defend him, Ethan decides to take the loyal boy under his wing. That night, Ethan catches Justin frantically sharpening a makeshift shiv in the showers. Disarming him with a swift strike, Ethan decides to break Justin psychologically. Whispering specific details about the high school murder that only the victim could know, Ethan claims he is possessed by the boy's vengeful spirit. Terrified by the supernatural revelation, Justin collapses to the floor in absolute horror. On the morning of his release, Ethan steps past the prison gates. The corporate lawyer is waiting with a briefcase full of hush money, but Ethan coldly rejects it. He travels straight to the coastal pier and successfully unearths the hidden 10 billion won from his fixer life, entirely unaware of a shadow tailing his movements. At the central transit station, Ethan divides the cash into 2 duffel bags, placing one inside a public locker configured to lock permanently if not retrieved within 4 days. Arriving in his rural hometown to visit the host's mother, an elderly man blindsides Ethan, driving a rusted blade deep into his torso. The attacker is the grieving father of the hit-and-run victim. Tyler suddenly sprints into the alley, seemingly rushing to help, but his expression turns cold as he draws a switchblade of his own. It turns out Tyler had merely played the loyal friend to bide his time for the lawyer's bounty. Tyler stabs him repeatedly, and Ethan bleeds out on the pavement while his phone vibrates continuously with an unanswered call from his mother. Awaking in the bleak underworld, Ethan barely exchanges a word with death before a sudden bullet sends him spinning into his 6th life. To his absolute horror, he opens his eyes to find himself trapped in the body of a newborn baby. Because the brain is completely undeveloped, the glowing memory shard never arrives, leaving Ethan completely helpless against his venomously abusive parents. When a social worker arrives to investigate a child endangerment report, the father smoothly flashes a professional credential, revealing he is a high-ranking executive for child welfare. Trusting his status, the authorities leave. Enraged by the investigation, the mother snaps, pinning the infant to the floor and pressing a heavy pillow over his face until the breathing stops. Materializing back in the dark chamber, Ethan is met by a grim death, who notes that countless souls are denied a fair chance from the moment of their birth, warning him never to take the gift of existence for granted. She pulls the trigger, launching his 7th cycle. Ethan blinks into consciousness outside a bustling metropolitan transit station. Checking the smartphone in his pocket, a countdown timer warns him that the security locker containing his remaining 5 billion won is minutes away from expiring. Sprinting through the dense crowds, he shoves past commuters and slides into the locker bay a mere second before the transit workers open the vault. After retrieving his money, Ethan catches his reflection in the transit station windows and experiences a shock. His new face is everywhere, plastered across massive commercial advertisements lining the walls. The glowing memory shard finally pierces his consciousness, revealing that he now inhabits the body of a spectacularly successful runway model who has been a heartthrob since high school. A glamorous modeling career came easily to this host, and his bank account is overflowing because of it. Excited, Ethan travels to his new residence, a breathtakingly luxurious penthouse. Eager to preserve this magnificent reality, he schemes the morning newspaper, discovering that the abusive social worker and his wife have already been arrested for the infant's murder. The mysterious deaths of the MMA fighter and the catastrophic multi-car pileups from his fixer life are also making headlines, though the authorities remain completely baffled by the chaos. That evening, a text from a colleague invites him to an exclusive VIP lounge. Ethan decides to indulge, but while his old self could handle alcohol, the model's body has an incredibly low tolerance, leaving him far more intoxicated than anticipated. Scanning the elite crowd, his heart stops when he spots Thomas, who has smoothly ascended to the position of chief executive following the tragic death of his younger brother in the private jet explosion. The next morning, Ethan oversleeps through a brutal hangover, forcing his foster brother to physically wake him up. The brother explains he is leaving for a week-long business trip to the United States and reminds Ethan that he promised to manage his cozy neighborhood cafe. During his first shift behind the counter, Ethan instantly regrets his promise and considers closing the shop early. But the front door chimes open, and his breath catches in his throat as Chloe steps inside. Staring at her in absolute awe, a wave of bittersweet memories floods his mind, including the cinematic afternoon they first met, when a sudden gust of wind scattered her college papers across the pavement and he had rushed to help her gather them. Ethan's hands shake so violently with nerves that he can barely hand Chloe her iced coffee. His foster brother mentions that she is a loyal regular who writes at the corner table until closing every single day, revealing she is actually a published novelist. Intrigued, Ethan searches her name online, discovering she recently won a prestigious national literary contest that secured her a major publishing contract. A wave of intense guilt crashes over him when he views a video of her acceptance speech. Holding a trophy, she tearfully thanked her boyfriend for working multiple jobs to support her dreams. The thick envelope she had tried to hand him on the night of their breakup hadn't been an act of charity at all. It was her prize money. Desperate to understand her heart, Ethan sprints to a nearby bookstore to buy her debut novel, remembering how she always vowed to weave her raw, personal experiences into her prose. Turning the pages, tears stream down his face as he recognizes their entire love story mirrored in the chapters. From the petty jealousy he felt toward her male colleagues to the quiet nights they first whispered their love to one another. Weeping in the bookstore aisle, Ethan notices a display case selling a luxury engraved fountain pen. Years ago, he had secretly purchased that exact pen for her, painstakingly carving her name into the casing, only to lose it in the mud while frantically moving his belongings through the rain. Returning to the cafe, the sophisticated man he had previously seen gifting Chloe flowers arrives at her table, accompanied by a woman and a little girl who happily screams, "Auntie Chloe!" Feeling like an absolute fool, Ethan realizes the man was simply her older brother. Reinvigorated, he resolves to keep the cafe running perfectly for the rest of the week just to remain near her. The following afternoon, Ethan serves Chloe with newfound confidence, slipping a complimentary slice of cake onto her tray and introducing himself as a massive admirer of her work. Bending the truth, he pretends he is drafting a supernatural screenplay of his own, recounting the harrowing tale of Lady Death, the underworld trials, and the cycle of stolen lives as if it were a fictional protagonist's journey. When he asks her to sign his copy of her novel, he gasps. Gripped firmly in her hand is the exact engraved fountain pen he lost in the storm. Chloe softly explains that after his tragic passing, his grieving mother had salvaged his ruined belongings from the sidewalk and presented the pen to her at the funeral. Over the next few days, their connection deepens. Chloe continues her daily writing sessions, and Ethan frequently slides into the booth across from her to discuss her narrative. One quiet evening, Chloe muses over his script idea, questioning why the cursed protagonist hasn't gathered the courage to visit his own mother. Ethan looks away, whispering that looking into her eyes while wearing a stranger's face would simply cause too much agonizing pain. Moments after she departs for the night, a fleet of police cruisers tears down the avenue with sirens wailing. A panicked customer runs inside, shouting that a regular patron was just struck by a vehicle at the main intersection. Fearing the absolute worst, Ethan sprints blindly down the dark street. Spotting a pool of dark blood on the asphalt, he screams in agony, struggling violently as responding officers pin him back from the crime scene. Suddenly, a soft hand rests on his shoulder. Ethan turns to see Chloe standing safely among the gathering spectators, and his racing heart finally calms. Deeply moved by his intense reaction, Chloe thanks him for caring so fiercely, confessing that she experienced that exact paralyzing terror the night she received the phone call about her boyfriend's suicide, recalling how she completely collapsed on the hospital linoleum. The following morning, Ethan follows Chloe from a distance as she visits his own memorial niche. He watches her weep bitterly against the glass, whispering how desperately she misses him. Once she departs, Ethan finally summons the courage to approach his own gravesite, only to turn a corner and collide directly with his mother. Stammering a polite excuse about being in the wrong wing, Ethan quickly retreats, unable to bear the weight of looking her in the eyes. Watching from the shadows, he witnesses his mother meticulously polishing his framed photograph before fleeing into the restroom to sob uncontrollably. Crushed by a wave of suffocating sorrow, Ethan rushes out into the alleyway and undergoes a violent emotional breakdown. Determined to ease her suffering, Ethan drafts a careful letter to his mother, pretending to be a wealthy, successful corporate colleague of her late son, claiming that Ethan had securely invested a massive sum of capital for her future before his passing. He slips the letter inside the duffel bag containing his remaining $5 billion and creeps up to his childhood home, placing the fortune on the porch. Catching a glimpse of his childhood photographs through the window, he sprints back into the night. Walking down the dark avenue, a heavy commercial billboard suddenly snaps from its rusty hinges, plunging directly toward his head. Ethan jolts awake at the cafe counter, gasping for air as he realizes it was merely a stress-induced nightmare. The next evening, following another magical afternoon of deep conversation, Ethan offers to walk Chloe back to her apartment. As they stroll beneath the streetlights, the familiar distance between them evaporates, and Ethan is overwhelmed by the memories of how they used to walk hand in hand through these exact streets. He remembers how her corporate office coworkers used to sneer at her for dating a lowly restaurant waiter, and how Chloe would fearlessly pull him closer, introducing him proudly as the love of her life. Unable to live a lie for another second, Ethan stops beneath a street lamp and confesses the absolute, impossible truth to her. But before Chloe can even process his words, a pair of blinding high beams rounds the corner. A luxury sedan accelerates violently, slamming directly into them at lethal speed. Chloe is killed instantly upon impact. Pinned beneath the crushed chassis, a dying Ethan opens his eyes, staring through the shattered windshield at the driver stepping out of the vehicle. It is Thomas. A horrifying realization pieces the puzzle together. Thomas is the wealthy executive who was playing with the luxury lighter. He is the ultimate puppet master, intricately stitched into the tragedy of every single life Ethan has inhabited. The corrupt corporate lawyer scrambles out of the passenger seat, fleeing the hit-and-run scene in absolute terror. Seeing that the model is still drawing breath, Thomas calmly pulls a pair of leather driving gloves over his hands, stepping forward to finish Ethan off in cold blood. Instantly, Ethan materializes back in the pitch-black underworld. Consumed by a blinding, transcendent rage, he doesn't wait for a lecture. He charges across the barren wasteland, wrests the heavy pistol directly out of Death's hands, and fires a bullet straight into her forehead.